The biggest mistake of my life lasted less than 2 seconds, but it changed everything that came after. The locker room exploded with laughter, music, and the sound of metal lockers slamming shut as our team celebrated the biggest victory in school history. Jerseys hung from open doors, towels covered the benches, and someone sprayed sports drink across the room while the rest of the guys shouted loud enough to shake the walls. We had just won the state championship, and every face around me carried the kind of happiness athletes spent years chasing. Every face except mine. I should have been celebrating with everyone else, but my eyes kept finding only one person. Jason Brooks stood near the far corner of the locker room with the championship trophy resting against one shoulder, while teammates congratulated him one after another. He smiled the way a captain was supposed to smile, thanking every player before quietly handing the trophy to someone else so the younger guys could enjoy their moment. That was Jason. Even on the biggest night of his college career, he somehow made everyone else feel more important than himself. Maybe that was why I had fallen for him long before I ever admitted it to myself. I tried to look away, but I could not. My heartbeat grew louder than the celebration around me. Every memory of the past year rushed through my mind at once. Every extra practice after sunset. Every ride back from away games. Every encouraging word after a bad performance. Every quiet conversation when nobody else stayed behind. None of those moments had meant anything to anyone else. To me, they had become everything. I told myself to leave before I did something stupid. I even took 3 steps toward the exit. Then Jason looked across the room and smiled directly at me. It was not a dramatic smile. It was small, warm, and familiar. The same expression he always wore whenever he wanted to ask if I was doing all right without embarrassing me in front of the team. Somehow that simple look destroyed every wall I had spent months trying to build. Before I could stop myself, I turned around and walked back toward him. Nobody paid attention because everyone remained busy celebrating. Jason noticed me approaching and tilted his head slightly. "Everything okay, Ryan?" he asked. I nodded, even though nothing inside me felt steady anymore. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I asked quietly. He followed me without hesitation toward the quieter hallway beside the equipment room where the music faded into the background. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. My hands trembled. I knew I should walk away. I knew I should keep pretending that admiration was all I felt. Instead, I stepped closer, reached for the front of his championship jacket, and before fear could catch me, I pressed a quick, gentle kiss against his lips. It lasted no more than a heartbeat. The instant it ended, reality crashed into me. Jason froze completely. His hazel eyes widened with pure surprise, not anger, not disappointment, only shock. I immediately stepped backward as my face burned with embarrassment. "I am sorry," I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice. I should not have done that. Without waiting for an answer, I turned and hurried out of the hallway, past the celebration, past the cheering crowd, and out into the cool night air. My chest tightened with every step until I could barely breathe. I climbed into my car, gripped the steering wheel, and stared through the windshield, convinced I had just destroyed the most important friendship of my life. As tears blurred the championship stadium behind me, I closed my eyes and found myself remembering the first day I had ever met Jason Brooks, long before one stolen kiss changed everything between us. The first time I met Jason Brooks, I almost walked back to my car before introducing myself. Orientation for the soccer team began on a humid August morning, and the parking lot outside the athletic center was already packed with players unloading duffel bags and coolers. I stood there holding my own worn backpack, wondering if I had made a mistake trying out for a program with such a strong reputation. I had always been a decent player back home, but college felt like a completely different world. Everyone looked confident. Everyone seemed to know somebody. I knew nobody. I checked my phone one last time before taking a deep breath and walking toward the locker room. The coaches were busy handing out schedules, locker assignments, and training gear. Conversations filled every corner of the room, but I stayed quiet, hoping to blend into the background. Then someone called my name. I turned around and saw a tall player wearing the captain's practice shirt walking toward me with an easy smile. "Ryan Walker, right?" he asked. I nodded, surprised he already knew who I was. "I am Jason. Welcome to the team." He reached out his hand, and I shook it, still trying to calm my nerves. "Coach said you play center back. We are glad you are here." There was nothing dramatic about the conversation, Yet those simple words immediately made the room feel less intimidating. Jason introduced me to the rest of the team, helped me find my locker, and even pointed out which trainers always carried extra athletic tape because, according to him, every freshman forgot something during the first week. The other guys laughed, and for the first time that morning, I laughed too. Practice started an hour later under the hot summer sun. I quickly realized college soccer moved faster than anything I had experienced before. Every drill demanded more speed, sharper decisions, and better conditioning. By the end of practice, my legs felt like they weighed 100 pounds. While everyone else headed toward the water station, I stayed behind trying to catch my breath without looking completely exhausted. Jason jogged back across the field and handed me a cold bottle of water. "First day is always rough," he said. "Tomorrow will still be rough, but at least you will know what to expect." I smiled. "That is not very encouraging." He laughed. "Trust me, you belong here. Just keep showing up." Those words stayed with me longer than he probably realized. Over the next several weeks, Jason seemed to notice the little things nobody else paid attention to. If I stayed late after practice working on defensive positioning, he stayed too. If I struggled during conditioning, he slowed his pace just enough to keep me from falling behind without making it obvious. He never acted like he was doing me a favor. He simply treated leadership as something quiet instead of something loud. I admired him because of that. At least, that was what I told myself back then. I did not realize those small moments were slowly changing the way I looked at him, and I definitely did not realize they were leading me toward a future neither of us could possibly see. As summer slowly gave way to the beginning of the season, the campus stopped feeling unfamiliar, and the soccer field became the place where I felt most at home. Classes filled my mornings, weight training filled my afternoons, and almost every evening ended with another practice under the bright stadium lights. Those extra hours after the official session were never required, but Jason almost always stayed. Sometimes he worked on free kicks while I practiced defensive footwork. Other times we simply passed the ball back and forth until the sky turned orange and the maintenance crew started preparing to lock the gates. Those quiet evenings became my favorite part of every day. They were never filled with dramatic conversations. Instead, Jason asked ordinary questions that somehow made me feel seen. He wanted to know how my classes were going, whether I missed my family, and if I had found the best place to eat near campus. He listened carefully to every answer, never checking his phone or looking distracted. I realized that he treated every teammate with respect, but there were moments when I wondered if I was imagining something different whenever he looked at me. During one practice, I completely mistimed a defensive challenge and let one of our forwards score an easy goal. Frustrated, I kicked the grass and apologized to everyone. After the drill ended, Jason jogged over and quietly tossed the ball back to me. "Do it again," he said. I shook my head. "I already messed it up." He smiled. "Exactly. That is why we do it again." We repeated the same drill over and over until I finally got the timing right. When I succeeded, Jason raised his hand for a quick high five. "See? I knew you could do it." That small moment stayed with me much longer than the successful tackle itself. It was not because he praised me. It was because he genuinely believed I could improve before I believed it myself. As the weeks passed, our friendship grew naturally. On long bus rides to away games, he often chose the empty seat beside me instead of joining the louder conversations farther back. We talked about everything from favorite movies to childhood dreams. He admitted that carrying the responsibility of being captain sometimes felt heavier than people realized. I admitted that I constantly worried about disappointing everyone around me. He laughed softly and said, "You care too much about being perfect." I answered with a grin. "Coming from the captain, that sounds funny." He shook his head. "Trust me, nobody is perfect. We just get better at hiding our mistakes." I thought about those words for days afterward. Somewhere between those conversations, something inside me quietly changed. I stopped looking forward only to practice. I started looking forward to seeing Jason. His smile became the first thing I searched for when I arrived at the athletic center each morning. Hearing him call my name somehow made difficult days feel lighter. I kept telling myself that I simply respected him because he was an incredible leader, but deep down I was beginning to understand the truth. My admiration had become something much deeper, something I could not explain and definitely could not share with anyone, especially not with the one person who had unknowingly become the center of my entire college experience. By the middle of the season, Winning games had become almost routine, but keeping my emotions under control grew harder every week. The more time I spent with Jason, the more impossible it became to convince myself that what I felt was simple admiration. I knew he treated everyone with kindness because that was the kind of leader he was, yet every encouraging smile and every casual conversation meant far more to me than they ever should have. I hated myself for reading into ordinary moments, but my heart never seemed interested in listening to reason. Then the rumors started. They were small at first, nothing more than careless jokes thrown around after practice. A couple of teammates laughed about how the captain always seemed to know where I was, or how Jason somehow ended up partnering with me during almost every training drill. Nobody accused us of anything, and nobody sounded cruel. But even harmless jokes can feel much heavier when they touch the truth you are trying so desperately to hide. I laughed along with everyone else, pretending the comments meant nothing. Yet the moment I returned to my dorm room that night, I could not stop replaying every word in my head. From that day forward, I began creating distance wherever I could. If Jason invited me to stay after practice, I told him I needed to study. If he offered me a ride after an away game, I claimed another teammate had already asked first. During team meals, I chose seats on the opposite side of the table. None of those decisions felt natural, but they seemed safer than allowing myself to become even more attached. Jason noticed almost immediately. He never confronted me in front of anyone, but I caught him watching me with quiet confusion more than once. During one afternoon practice, Coach divided us into small groups for passing drills. Jason walked toward me out of habit before I quickly switched places with another defender. For just a second, I saw disappointment flash across his face before he covered it with his usual calm expression. That single look stayed with me for the rest of the day. A few evenings later, as I packed my gear after practice, Jason caught up with me outside the athletic center. The sun was already setting, painting the empty parking lot in shades of gold and orange. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked gently. The question caught me completely off guard. I stared at him, unable to answer. He continued before I could find the right words. "You have been avoiding me for weeks. If I said something that bothered you, I would rather know than keep guessing." Hearing genuine concern in his voice made the guilt almost unbearable. The truth sat on the tip of my tongue, but I could never say it. I forced a weak smile and shook my head. "No, classes have just been busy. That is all." Even as I spoke, I knew he did not believe me. Jason studied my face for a long moment, before nodding slowly. "All right," he said quietly. "Just remember that you do not have to handle everything alone." He walked toward his truck, leaving me standing there with a heavier heart than before. I watched him drive away until his taillights disappeared beyond the parking lot, wondering whether I had just protected our friendship or started breaking something that neither of us yet understood could be so difficult to repair. Championship day arrived faster than I expected, and somehow every emotion I had spent months trying to bury came rushing back before the opening whistle. The stadium was packed with families, students, and alumni dressed in our school colors, filling the air with excitement that could almost be felt. Coach reminded us to stay focused, but I barely heard his speech. My attention kept drifting toward Jason as he stood in front of the team, delivering his final words before we walked onto the field. He did not give a dramatic speech or try to sound like a movie hero. He simply reminded us that we had trusted each other all season and that the result would take care of itself if we played for one another instead of ourselves. Everyone nodded. I did too, but for a completely different reason. I realized I would have followed him anywhere. The match became the hardest game of my college career. Every tackle mattered. Every pass felt important. By the second half, my legs burned with exhaustion, yet nobody slowed down. When the final whistle finally echoed across the stadium and the scoreboard confirmed our victory, the entire bench rushed onto the field. Teammates hugged each other. Coaches laughed. Cameras flashed from every direction, and the crowd roared louder than I had ever heard before. Somewhere in the middle of all that celebration, Jason found me. He wrapped one arm around my shoulder with a huge smile and said, "You played the best match of your season." I thanked him, but my voice barely worked. His praise meant more than the championship itself. Back inside the locker room, the celebration only became louder. Music blasted through portable speakers while sports drinks sprayed across the room like fountains. Someone placed the championship trophy in the center of the floor, and everyone took turns posing for photos. I tried joining the celebration, But every time I looked at Jason, my chest tightened. This would be his final game as captain. Graduation was only weeks away. The quiet part of me understood that if I walked away without saying anything, I would spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I had been brave just once. Another part of me knew that some truths were safer left unspoken. Those two thoughts battled inside my head until I could barely think. Then Jason looked over, caught my eye, and smiled with the same quiet warmth he had shown me since the day we met. Without planning to, I walked toward him. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I asked. He nodded immediately and followed me toward the quieter hallway beside the equipment room, away from the music and cheering. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I searched for words that never came. Every thank you, every memory, every feeling I had hidden for nearly a year crowded together until none of them made sense anymore. Before fear convinced me to run away again, I reached for the front of his championship jacket and leaned forward, placing a brief, gentle kiss on his lips. It lasted only an instant before I stepped back, my heart pounding so hard I thought he could hear it. Jason stood completely still, his hazel eyes wide with surprise as he looked at me without saying a single word. My courage disappeared the moment I saw his expression. "I am sorry," I whispered, already feeling the weight of what I had done. "I should not have done that." I turned before he could answer, hurried through the crowded locker room, and pushed open the exit into the cool night air, convinced that I had just left the happiest day of my college life behind with the greatest mistake I had ever made. I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the look on Jason's face after I kissed him. It was not anger that haunted me. It was the silence. I replayed those few seconds over and over, searching for some small detail that might tell me what he had been thinking, but every memory ended the same way. His surprised expression, my apology, the sound of my footsteps as I ran away. By sunrise, I had convinced myself that avoiding him forever was probably the kindest thing I could do. Graduation events filled the campus during the following week, giving everyone plenty to do, yet I still managed to notice every place Jason was and every place he was not. Whenever I spotted him across the student center or near the athletic building, I quietly changed direction before he could see me. I ignored messages from teammates asking everyone to meet for championship photos. I even skipped our first unofficial celebration dinner, pretending I had a family obligation. The truth was much simpler. I could not imagine looking Jason in the eye after what I had done. 3 days later, my phone vibrated while I was sitting alone outside the campus library. My heart nearly stopped when I saw Jason's name on the screen. His message was short. "Can we talk? Just the two of us." I stared at those words for almost 5 minutes before finally typing a single answer. "Okay." He suggested meeting at the empty practice field that evening, long after the rest of the team had gone home. The familiar stadium lights were turned off, leaving only the soft glow from nearby campus buildings. Jason was already sitting in the front row of the bleachers when I arrived. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence felt uncomfortable, yet strangely peaceful compared to the chaos inside my own mind. I finally took a seat several feet away from him. "I owe you another apology," I said quietly. "You already apologized." His voice remained calm, exactly as it always had. I looked down at my hands. That does not change the fact that I crossed a line. Jason took a slow breath before answering. "Ryan, I was surprised. That part is true, but I was never angry with you." I looked up for the first time since sitting down. He continued carefully, choosing every word. "The reason I did not say anything that night was because I needed time to understand what I was feeling too." I blinked, unsure whether I had heard him correctly. Jason leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees as he stared out across the empty field where we had practiced together so many evenings. "For months I kept telling myself that the way I cared about you was simply because you were a teammate who worked hard. Then somewhere along the way, I started looking forward to every extra practice just as much as you probably did. That scared me." My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the breeze moving through the empty stadium. Jason gave a quiet, nervous laugh that I had never heard before. Being captain meant everyone watched what I did. I kept convincing myself that ignoring those feelings was the responsible thing. He turned toward me with an honest expression that carried neither certainty nor fear, only sincerity. "I am not asking you for an answer tonight. I just needed you to know that after you walked away, I realized I had been running from my own heart for a long time too." For the first time in months, I drove home from campus without feeling like my heart was fighting against itself. Jason's words stayed with me the entire night, not because they answered every question I had, but because they reminded me that I had never been alone in carrying those feelings. Even so, neither of us rushed to define what came next. We both understood that some things deserved patience instead of pressure. Graduation arrived only a few days later, bringing families, photographs, and endless congratulations across campus. Jason and I spoke several times during the ceremonies, but always naturally, never trying to force conversations that did not need to happen in front of everyone else. Somehow, the awkwardness that I had feared completely disappeared. Instead, it felt as though we had finally stopped pretending. After graduation, summer scattered everyone in different directions. Some teammates accepted professional opportunities, others returned home, and I stayed near campus for summer classes and conditioning before my next season. Jason remained in town as well, while finishing an internship with a local sports rehabilitation clinic. We began meeting once or twice each week, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for long walks around the river that ran through the edge of town. Those afternoons became something I quietly looked forward to. We laughed more than we ever had before. Without the pressure of practices, games, or the responsibilities of being captain and freshman, we finally talked as two ordinary people. Jason admitted that leadership had often forced him to hide his own emotions because he believed a captain should always appear confident. I admitted how many times I had almost told him the truth before convincing myself that silence was safer. He smiled softly and said, "Maybe we both spent too much time trying to protect each other from feelings we already shared." I laughed because he was probably right. As the weeks passed, our friendship settled into an easy rhythm. We explored small coffee shops, attended a local outdoor concert, and volunteered together at a youth soccer clinic one Saturday morning. Watching Jason encourage nervous children reminded me of the first day he had welcomed me to the team. Nothing about him had changed. He was still patient, thoughtful, and quietly generous with everyone around him. The only difference was that I no longer had to pretend those qualities did not mean something special to me. We still chose to keep our conversations private, not because we were ashamed, but because we wanted whatever was growing between us to develop honestly before inviting the opinions of everyone else. One evening, after finishing another walk beside the river, Jason stopped near the parking lot and looked toward the sunset reflecting across the water. "Do you know what I like most about this summer?" he asked. I shook my head. He smiled. "Neither of us is running anymore." His words settled gently over the quiet evening. I realized he was right. Months earlier, I had spent every day avoiding him, convinced distance would protect both of us. Now we could stand beside each other without fear, without pretending, and without searching for excuses to leave. As I drove home that night with the windows down and the warm breeze filling my car, I realized that whatever the future held, we had already rebuilt something far stronger than either of us had believed possible, and for the first time since that unforgettable night in the locker room, hope felt much louder than regret. By the end of summer, I realized something surprising had happened. I had stopped wondering whether Jason cared about me because I no longer needed to guess. Instead, I found myself wondering how someone could spend so much time hiding feelings that seemed so obvious now. One Saturday evening, we returned to the same riverside trail where we had walked so many times during the previous months. The weather was perfect, with a gentle breeze moving across the water while families enjoyed picnics nearby and cyclists passed us along the paved path. We carried iced coffee from our favorite cafe and talked about ordinary things at first. Jason had just completed another week at his internship, and I was preparing to report for preseason training. Everything felt comfortable, almost effortless, until we reached the small wooden overlook where we usually stopped to watch the sunset. Jason rested his hands against the railing and stared quietly across the river for several moments before speaking. "There is something I never told you," he said. His voice was calm, but I could hear the seriousness behind it. I nodded without interrupting him. "Do you remember that passing drill during your first semester, when you kept apologizing because you thought you were slowing everyone down?" I smiled. I remember feeling embarrassed all afternoon. He laughed softly. "That was the first day I noticed that I looked for you without realizing it. At first I thought it was because I was captain and wanted every freshman to succeed. That explanation worked for a while." He paused before continuing. Then I started finding excuses to stay after practice because I knew you would still be there. I looked forward to bus rides because I hoped the seat beside you would be empty. Every time you smiled after finally getting something right, my entire day became better. I listened in complete silence. Jason turned toward me with an honest expression that carried months of unspoken truth. When the jokes started around the team and you suddenly pulled away from me, I blamed myself. I thought I had pushed you too hard or somehow disappointed you. I never imagined you were creating distance because you cared about me. I slowly shook my head. I thought I was protecting both of us. He nodded. I know that now. The evening breeze carried a peaceful silence between us before he continued speaking. The night you kissed me, I was surprised because I never expected you to act first. But after you ran away, I realized something that I had been avoiding for a long time. I was not confused because of the kiss. I was confused because it forced me to admit feelings I had already been carrying. My chest tightened, but this time it was not from fear. It was from relief. Every lonely night spent believing I had imagined our connection suddenly disappeared. I smiled at him, unable to stop the tears gathering in my eyes. So, I was never the only one. Jason smiled back with the same warmth that had welcomed me on my very first day as a freshman. No, Ryan, you never were. I was simply too afraid to let myself believe that what I felt could become something real. As the sun slowly disappeared below the horizon, I realized that the greatest surprise was never that I had fallen in love with my captain. It was discovering that, through every practice, every conversation, and every quiet moment we had shared, he had quietly been falling in love with me too. 1 year after that unforgettable championship night, I stood on the same soccer field where everything between Jason and me had started to change. The stadium looked different without the pressure of a final match, without thousands of voices filling the seats, and without the weight of expectations resting on Jason's shoulders. He was no longer wearing the captain's band. He had graduated, started building his career, and moved into a new chapter of his life. Yet somehow, he was still the person who made every place feel familiar. I had learned that love was not created by one perfect moment. It was built through hundreds of small choices that showed someone they mattered. Jason proved that every day. He remembered the little details I mentioned during conversations. He supported my goals even when they had nothing to do with soccer. He encouraged me when I doubted myself and reminded me that my worth was never measured by a scoreboard or a trophy. Looking back, I realized that the person I admired from a distance had become the person standing beside me through every challenge. A few weeks after graduation, I attended Jason's final team ceremony. Former teammates gathered to celebrate his leadership, and the coaches shared stories about how much he had influenced younger players. When Jason was invited to speak, he stood in front of everyone with the same quiet confidence I had admired since my first day. He thanked his teammates, his coaches, and everyone who had supported him. Then he said something that stayed with me. The greatest part of being a leader is not being the person everyone follows. It is helping people believe they can become more than they thought possible. I smiled because I knew exactly who had done that for me. After the ceremony, Jason and I walked through the empty stadium one last time before leaving campus. The evening sun painted the field in warm colors, and for a moment, everything felt like it had come full circle. Do you ever think about how different things could have been? I asked. Jason looked at me with a thoughtful smile. All the time, but I think everything happened exactly when it was supposed to. I laughed softly. Even the part where I ran away after kissing you? He smiled. Especially that part. You finally stopped hiding. I looked across the field where I had spent years chasing impossible standards and trying to be someone everyone else expected me to be. Jason had never asked me to become anyone different. He had only reminded me that I was already enough. Years later, when people asked how our story began, I never knew whether to tell them about the championship, the late practices, or the quiet conversations after sunset. The truth was that our story did not begin with one single moment. It began with every small act of kindness that slowly brought two people together before either of us understood what was happening. The locker room was only where everything finally became impossible to ignore. The real story had started much earlier, on a college soccer field, when a nervous freshman met a captain who believed in him before he believed in himself. And as we walked away from that field together, I knew the greatest victory of my life had never been winning a championship. It was finding someone who made me feel seen, understood, and completely accepted. It was finding Jason.